This is the Russian Defense Ministry claims that Chechen special forces are launching an offensive in the east. Is this even remotely true? Can we verify this? Let's find out. Avdiivka, all right, subdivisions of what they're calling Special Purpose Akhmat Detachment
Подразделения отряда специального назначения Ахмат продолжают наступать
and Marinka during the fighting more.
действия на Маринском тактическом направлении. В ходе
Okay, they claim to have inflicted a ton of casualties, including pickup trucks,
боев уничтожено более
D-20 howitzers, a bunch of Grad
50
MLRS,
украинских военнослужащих,
and a bunch of M777s, and a Paladin.
4 боевые бронированные машины, 2 пикапа, 3 гаубицы Д-20,
Have been destroyed. All right, now where is this fighting exactly? So he's talking about Avdiivka and Marinka. So if we look south of Bakhmut, you can see here is Avdiivka, and Marinka is still further to the south. And what I want to point out, you can see as we back up through the weeks, there's not really a ton of evidence that there's been real progress outside of Marinka. But what we have seen is the total volume of Russian offensive action has dropped to like incredibly low levels in the last 2 weeks or so. This despite the fact that Russia and Russia's Ministry of Defense hasn't been able to take any of their operational objectives. In fact, when we look here, we can back up. So this is about 2 weeks of progress. And as we advance through it, we can see that there's been virtually no change to territorial control. A little bit of advances here over a completely zero value terrain outside of Kamyanka. This is part of an effort to encircle Avdiivka, but you can see that the routes to and from the city remain totally clear. It's just really, again, you can see here, even though Russian forces make some advances, they also get pushed back near Optine. This is the opposite, and this is the best the Chechens can throw at Ukrainian forces, and they're just not that good. And this is a problem that's inherent to strongmen. Of isn't going to select his special forces, right? What we think of is that you select your special forces for their toughness, for their competence, sometimes for their experience, and you weed them out through a rigorous process that ensures that only those with the best mental toughness, the most competence, the ability to learn and train quickly, right? That's what makes them elite. But when you're a strong man like Kadyrov, your greatest fear is that you will be betrayed by these forces. Because remember, when Kadyrov raises an army, he needs that army to be loyal to him personally, not to Chechnya, not to each other, not to their commanders, because history is littered with well-liked commanders overthrowing their dictator bosses. So what he selects for in his special forces is loyalty above all, family ties, family connections, cultural unity. That's what he views. That's what he wants. So when you see Chechen special forces, it means they're especially friendly, is the best way to think of it. So while they have high-end gear, they may have good training, they don't have that. They're not selected for any special level of toughness or competence. They're just selected for loyalty. And I'm not saying this is universal. There may be some Chechens who are just really tough dudes. The Chechens are a tough people. They are they are fighters, right? They are fighters through and through. But being a tough fighter is not sufficient, right? You have to be competent. That's why SEAL selection isn't just a bunch of MMA fights, right? There's a lot more skills to be an elite soldier and a member of an elite unit. So I say all that so that you understand that when you see Russia tout these Chechen fighters as being some sort of magic super fighters, they're not. And the data is clear. They are Nepo babies with high-end optics and cool guy camo. They're airsoft bros.
Боевые машины РСЗО «Град», 2 артиллерийские системы М7.
Dude, translate the whole thing or don't translate it at all.
577, а также самоходная артиллерийская установка «Паладин» производства США.
Okay.
На Донецком направлении наиболее активные действия
Right.
южной группировки войск велись в районе населенного пункта Авдеевка в этом направлении. Тоже на более машины.
Hopefully you guys understand why I keep bringing these up, so you understand how different sides of this war are spinning different parts of the conflict or spinning what's happening. And everyone is doing it. Please understand this. I can dunk on Russia because it's so easy, because the Kremlin is so out of touch. Ukraine is much more sophisticated. They still have spin. I've talked about it when reviewing Insight in Ukraine and Russia's videos, where he emphasizes certain things over other things. That's a very Western way of doing propaganda. You magnify your victories and you minimize your losses, but you stay committed to the truth, right? Because the belief in the West is that because there's usually a free press, if you don't provide relatively true-ish information, people are going to tune you out because they can access true information. When they can't access true information, you could say anything you want to. And that's still how Russia operates. They operate in that Soviet era where the Soviet media controlled everything, not realizing that any Russian can access like information. One more. Yeah, we do. We have one more round of the Russian defense minister trying to backpedal, trying to cover the incursion into Belgorod. So let's take a look at it. Okay. Guys, this is the Russian Defense Ministry claiming that it's prevented 3 attacks, keeping Ukraine from crossing the border in Belgorod. We're going to see again how they do damage control on what is increasingly one of the most embarrassing incidents of at least this quarter in the conflict. And this is Russia's inability to keep its border secure. Let's see how Russia spins this. I want to point out, I still hate this. This is the dumbest briefing setup. Like just these random maps. It looks like they want to project that Russia has some sort of big centralized command, but I don't think that's necessarily true. And Prigozhin intersperses, like Prigozhin always looks like he's in the thick of it, and these guys always look like they aren't anywhere close to the thick of it. And it's a massive dichotomy, and it's fascinating to me because Prigozhin is not a career military man. In fact, I'm not sure he's ever served in the military. So he's bringing a non-military perspective to warfighting. And I don't know if scary is the right word, but he's really good at it. Like, relative to the Russian military environment, Prigozhin is doing more with less. Now, obviously, he's not constrained by things like the law of war and being a team player, and that makes it a little easier, but it's still pretty embarrassing and is a testament to how out of touch the Russian military is with just effectiveness in general. And it also, I think there's a cautionary tale for the United States as well. Like, our military culture is very insular. Its leadership, there are no military leaders who are not career military. Every single one of the current general officers, almost everyone, with the exception of a few reserve officers, have never had a civilian career of any substance. They have no idea how the civilian world works. And like at the end of the day, I say this, I'm a combat veteran. I served in the U.S. Army. I'm proud of my service. The U.S. military has taken an L to a ragtag militia of Iraqis and a bunch of religious cultists living in the mountains in Afghanistan. And in that same 20 years, the U.S. private sector has developed social media, the smartphone, AI, satellite network of internet. The question you should ask yourselves is, who should be taking notes from whom? As it stands now, corporations love getting Navy SEALs to come speak at their events to be like, you've got to be tougher. But what should be happening is the Pentagon should be getting like Google execs to be like, listen, here's how we make decisions about business lines. Here's how I make decisions quickly about product launches. Here's how I think about my problems. Here's how we recruit at Google, right? Like, how does Google promote? Because the military, the US military, just promotes if you have a pulse and you haven't gotten in trouble. Like, what does Google do if somebody heads up a project that fails? The military destroys your career. Maybe there's a better way. I'm just going to point, again, it's a cautionary tale. But this, well, let's watch this guy live in the past.
Пограничной службы и другими подразделениями ФСБ России сорвана новая попытка киевского режима провести террористический акт в отношении гражданского населения.
Okay, so he says it is attempting to commit. Listen, if you can drop artillery onto something, you've probably succeeded in your attack. And I also, okay, listen. I'm going to point out the hypocrisy here. Russia routinely targets civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, like routinely, and targets it. So I just point that stuff out because you gotta, this is the pot calling the kettle black.
Около 3 часов утра по московскому времени, после интенсивного обстрела гражданских объектов в Белгородской области, украинские террористические формирования силами до 2 мотопехотных рот, усиленных танками, предприняли попытку вторжения на территорию Российской Федерации в районе населенного пункта Новая Таволжанка и международного автомобильного пункта пропуска Шелек.
Yep. Okay, so as we talked about this, the border crossing is, let's see if I can show it to you up here. So it's well in the north. It is, here's Shebekino, and here's the border crossing that they attempted to seize. And I wanted to zoom in on this. Let's see if we can actually, I think it'll be more clear here. This is a better map. You can see this is just a secure border checkpoint. They wanted to, it's not clear what they wanted to do. I suspect that this raid was simply to stage an incursion to get the Russian forces to deploy, because this is just such poorly chosen terrain. Or it could have been a mistake. It could have been a straight up mistake. Like, we're not above it. It could have just been a really bad choice, because if you're an insurgent movement, you want cover, you want concealment, and you want it to be really hard for your enemy to discern fires. So this would be a way better location, right? You cross the border, you have cover and concealment with these trees, you have lots of civilians, so it's hard to bring heavy firepower to bear. This, if you can't, you seize this, but then you're like trapped in this. You have to cross big swaths of open terrain to make further advances. It's so bad that I have a hard time believing that experienced soldiers would choose to attack this site unless it was a raid, where you're just like, the whole goal is to just take this border station, hold it for a little bit, and then withdraw. That's the only theory that I can come up with as to why they would do things this way. Not sure how they, I guess maybe they mean three phases. I'm not sure how they decided it was 3. 11 airstrikes. That should tell you again that they've committed combat aircraft to securing the border. And this is combat aircraft that need to be on standby. They can't get reassigned to Bakhmut or Avdiivka or Marinka. And that's huge. Like, just remember that this isn't about winning. Ukraine has no designs on holding Russian territory. This is about destabilizing the Russian government and humiliating them, and tying up as many Russian forces to stay in Russia as possible. Because remember, it's not about inflicting casualties. It's about taking units out of the fight. And if they sit in an airbase in Belgorod, they're out of the fight. You might as well have destroyed that helicopter if it simply sits there. Sorry, when they say fire-throwing systems, they mean thermobaric rockets. Okay, active operations, again, means that they're doing stuff. They're thinking it through. They're patrolling. They're active. And again, it's a sign that that the cross-border raids are achieving their effect. The Russian war machine is spinning its wheels somewhere other than Ukrainian sovereign territory.
округа и ФСБ России террористические формирования киевского режима, понеся существенные потери, отброшены. Нарушение государственной границы не допущено.
Okay, breakthroughs of the state border have been prevented. That's not accurate. And the reason I say that is because they weren't, right? Maybe it wasn't as extensive as the first raid to the west, but I look at the terrain and there's just no way that's the case. So it's hard to know, but it doesn't really matter because the raid's objective is achieved simply by occurring.